Hello, everyone, and welcome to this exclusive Reuters Events webinar. My name is Johnny Witherspoon, and I'm a Senior Project Director at Reuters Events. Thank you all for joining us today and making time to participate in what promises to be an exceptional hour of unrivaled insights. As businesses around the world look to reduce costs, increase efficiency, and enhance the traceability of their supply chain network, we have assembled a panel of industry-leading experts to explore how public blockchains will reshape industry supply chains and competition. Our first panelist today is Paul Brodie. Paul is the global blockchain leader at EY, where he's been leading and building the blockchain solutions and software business since joining in 2015. Prior to joining EY, he spent 14 years at IBM, including work in supply chain management and as the vice president for the global electronics industry. He also built IBM's very first blockchain solution, which was called Adept on the alpha version of Ethereum. In addition to his time at IBM, Paul has worked at 5 different startups and started his career at McKinsey & Co. in Los Angeles. He has a degree in economics and a certificate in African studies from Princeton University. Our second panelist today is Dr. Mary Lasseter. Mary is a Walton Professor of Information Systems and Director of the Blockchain Center of Excellence in the Sam M. Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. The Blockchain Center of Excellence works with enterprises to research the adoption of blockchain-enabled business solutions. She was previously Curator's Distinguished Professor at the University of Missouri. She has held visiting positions at MIT, the London School of Economics, Washington University, and Oxford University. She has also published 30 books, most recently Blockchain Foundations for the Internet of Value in 2020. Our third panelist today is Stefano De Alessandri, the CEO of Answer. Born in Milan in 1959, he has a degree in economics from Milan's Boccini University and a wealth of experience in the general management of media publishing companies and in management consulting. After starting his career at Pub Italia, he joined the RCS Media Group in 1989 as marketing director and later became deputy general manager of magazines. Subsequently, he moved to Condé Nast as deputy general manager. In 2003, he took on the role of managing director and general manager of Gruner & Jahr, Mondadori, and then in 2005, he moved to Hachette Rasconi, taking up the same position there. During this time, he was giving particular focus to the enhancement of media brands and the integrated development of digital technology. In 2010, he moved to Mondadori's magazines area. Then he held the role of CEO for radio and international activities of the group. Between 2013 and 2018, he was partner and MED region board member at EY, and he held senior positions at media sector associations for 10 years as vice president of FIEG, Audi Press, ADS, and FIPP. Currently, he is president of the National News Agency's Publishers and member of the executive committee of FIEG. Our final panelist today is York Rhodes, Director of Digital Transformation for Blockchain from Microsoft. York leads blockchain on Azure engagements for the most advanced customer and partner requirements on a path to production. He is co-founder of blockchain at Microsoft and a core team member focused on blockchain strategy. He manages a worldwide team focused on driving the success of many open source and commercial blockchain partners. And York has held a number of leadership positions at startups, wireless industry, and digital agencies, including Zeta Interactive, as well as leadership roles at IBM and Goldman Sachs. He is also an adjunct professor of digital e-commerce marketing at New York University. So as I'm sure you'll all agree, we have a real abundance of knowledge and experience amongst today's panelists, and I'd like to thank them all for joining us today for this webinar. Just to give you a little bit of an overview, today's webinar is going to consist of a presentation led by Paul Brodie from EY, and this is going to be looking at the business case for public blockchains. The second half of the webinar will then be a moderated panel discussion with the other members of our esteemed panel. I'm afraid due to time constraints, we won't be taking any questions from the audience today, so I'd ask that you just sit back with a fresh cup of coffee and enjoy the fantastic insights that we'll be showcasing today. At this point, I'd like to hand over to you, Paul, and ask the other members of the panel turn off their cameras whilst Paul delivers his presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Johnny. You can hear me all right?
We can indeed.
Terrific. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. I'm Paul Brodie, the global blockchain leader at EY. Blockchain is a passion of mine, right? So some nightclubs have a 2-drink minimum. I feel like I'm always on the 2 coffee minimum. I'm a little hyperactive. I care about it a lot, but in particular, I care a lot about the use of blockchain as a tool for business transformation. I've spent 20 years in the business of enterprise software, digging through supply chain, business operations issues. And I really have come to believe that blockchain technology, and very specifically public blockchains, have a compelling value proposition to simplify how companies interact together. And what I want to do today is take all of you through a very straightforward explanation of kind of what blockchains are, how they work, and then dive into, first of all, why blockchains are going to be very useful for enterprises, and in particular, what are some of the use cases that will create a great deal of value, first of all, right away, and then secondly, as this kind of industry matures over time, as it's continuing to do. So let me go ahead and get started. I'll share with you a few slides, and we can get going. So what are blockchains, right? Sort of any kind. Blockchains are, in a very simple way to talk about it, is they're a digital environment that allows users to manage shared assets and agreements where every participant verifies the work of the others. And if somebody says, well, what are blockchains made of? A good simple answer is three important things. Number one, tokens. Digital tokens are things of value. They can represent real world assets like cars or trucks. They can represent entirely virtual and things like Bitcoins, but they're items of value. Contracts are business processes, business agreements. These are the tools that we use to interact with each other. And they're useful in the sense of being able to both define business process or run an actual binding legal process between two companies. And then finally, user accounts, which are often talked about in the world of blockchain as wallets, right? And what's really special about blockchains and what makes them particularly different from other types of systems is that they have no central controlling authority. So historically, if we were going to do some kind of transaction between myself and somebody else, that would go through a central authority. It could be a bank, it could be my credit card company, but there is a single entity that's making that decision. In a blockchain, all the participants in the blockchain actually are involved in verifying each other's data, right? And that means that the network itself is decentralized, but it's also very resilient to attack as long as more than half the participants in the network are behaving honestly, the system as a whole functions. It also makes blockchains tamper resistant because everybody's got a copy of the transactional data. And sure, you could go in and change your own historical data, but now you're obviously out of sync with everybody else. Now, 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, my mother was actually a mainframe software developer. In those days, doing something like blockchain would just seem crazy, right? Because you're doing all of this work over and over again. Everybody's checking everybody else. But these days, it turns out it's a pretty good deal because what we're doing is we're trading something that's cheap, which is computing power, of which we have an awful lot, for something that's rare and valuable, which is really trustworthy, reliable transactional data. So blockchains are a clever gimmick, but they're much more than that because they offer companies a better way to do business with each other with less risk, right? And the reason for this is that centralized intermediaries, these digital software entities that have come to dominate markets, are very powerful, right? And what they do is they leverage the economics of software, zero marginal cost, right? If I invest in software, it doesn't cost me anything to let another company use it. So the better my software is, the more users I can get. And when I combine that with network effects, right, the more users that are in my system, the more powerful and valuable my system becomes, and the more users I attract, what I get is the opportunity to lock somebody in my proprietary platform, right? And that results in market dominance. It's not an accident that probably one of the most visible trends of the last few decades has been the increasing concentration of industries, especially those industries where there is a great deal of technological content, right? There may be a dozen automakers, but there's only a couple providers of operating systems depending on the software platform you're using. Now, blockchains offer us an alternative. They still have some of those features of digital systems. They've got zero marginal cost, they've got network effects, But blockchains offer the option of open access. Instead of locking you into a particular company or network, they offer you the ability to participate on equal terms with others. And what that means is a much more level and open competitive playing field. Now, despite lots of people talking about the blockchain as if there's one, there are in fact many of them. And in particular, they fall into broadly sort of two categories. The first are public blockchains. Public blockchains are like the internet. Anybody can join in, anybody can transact on them, and there's no owning or centralized controlled entity. Most public blockchains have a nonprofit foundation that helps set standards, but most of the content is open source. Anybody can use it. There's no kind of monopoly or control. There's no entity that can suddenly say, you know what, we are hugely successful, we can raise prices. The other flavor of blockchain is a concept of a private blockchain. These are privately run, privately administered. They are access controlled, both to the members and the transactions, and they're often run by a single company or a company on behalf of a group of companies in an industry. Now, private blockchains sound very appealing, but in reality, they haven't been very successful. And they haven't been very successful because too many different parties want to set up their own blockchain network. It is kind of the natural instinct. People want to control the infrastructure that they are running. So, you know, a logistics company here sets up a group of shipping companies for their own blockchain. And somebody else sets up an insurance service provider, and then a retailer sets up their supply chain. And before you know it, if you want to ship a product to somebody who's your client, you've got to join 3 or 4 different blockchains. And that isn't very appealing or scalable. And private blockchains tend not to be very successful at getting lots of participants. Indeed, we did a survey with one of our partners, and we found that the average private blockchain has 0.5 participants. How do we get that way? Well, about 1% of participants have joined a consortium. Another 30% have joined somebody else's network. But the majority, 2/3, started their own network, right? This is a little bit like everybody deciding to have a party on the same night. You're not going to get much attendance if everybody wants to set up their own network or have their own party. The beauty of public blockchains like Ethereum is they are orders of magnitude larger than any of the comparable private blockchains. The biggest private blockchains have tens, hundreds of users, and maybe tens of thousands of transactions. But Ethereum, just to give you a sense, it has nearly 50 million user addresses, almost 250,000 smart contracts have been deployed, 10,000 network nodes, over 1 million transactions on a typical day, and a market cap of about $40 billion. Now, in the context of the 25, $30 trillion global economy, that is a drop in the bucket. An infinitesimally small drop in the bucket, but it's orders of magnitude larger than any of the other options. And that's also true for the developer community. So if you're going to go onto a network, we would say go to a public blockchain and really go to the biggest one that you can. And I certainly believe, as the years goes on, these kinds of networks will become much, much larger over time. The other parallel with the early days of the internet that's really interesting is that privacy was missing in the early days of the internet. One of the things that slowed down the adoption of e-commerce was the fact that you couldn't securely and privately transmit your credit card in the early days of the web. But once SSL, the secure sockets layer, the tools for secure private web browsing for private transmission of your credit card data existed, it was then possible to have privacy for those transactions. E-commerce took off. The same thing is true of blockchains. Public blockchains didn't until recently have a lot of the things that businesses need. Now that's changed. Now we have on a public blockchain, private asset management. So you can privately hold and transfer assets. You can have private business logic with your other business partners. There are directories of verifiable business partners, and there are tools for enabling private data synchronization. And almost all of these on the Ethereum public blockchain are public domain and open source, which means that no one can decide later on they want to charge you more money or raise transaction fees for you to use that, right? In fact, all of these have come together in a group that's called the Baseline Protocol. And adoption is really ramping up in this area. EY was an early participant. We were one of the founding members. We did so alongside of Microsoft, Consensus, Accenture just joined. There are more than 50 companies that are building on this core public domain set of open source tools and standards to allow for secure, private, and I should add regulatory compliant business transactions on public blockchains. So you can get on this network with 10,000 nodes, right, 50 million users, and you can actually interact with all of these other participants securely and privately. So what's the business case? And we at EY, we believe the value proposition around public blockchains is their ability to connect up business ecosystems and therefore do at the ecosystem level what ERP, enterprise resource planning, did inside the enterprise. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Over the last 30 years, and I've spent much of my career in this space, we have made the way enterprises work much more sophisticated. We started with manufacturing tools. We've added ERP. We've got planning and scheduling on top of that. We have analytical tools. We have machine learning. The modern enterprise has become very sophisticated, right? And yet, ironically, the minute we want to interact with another company, we're back to emailing spreadsheets or PDF documents. That's not very sophisticated, right? All of that sophistication stops at the wall of the enterprise. With blockchains, we can have shared facts, we can have shared business process, we can do so privately with multiple parties, right, in real time or near real time, in a secure manner that's much more sophisticated. And when inventory changes at one end of the supply chain, we can trigger things like replenishment orders at the other end of the supply chain automatically. And there's none of this, I'm sending you a PDF, you need to scan it in, we need to check it, we're missing data, you know, I've got to email for other party stuff, right? Process automation across parties can be extremely valuable. How valuable, how much improvement can we achieve? I would say a huge amount. And I'll share with you just one case example that we'll dig into a bit more later on with York from Microsoft. EY and Microsoft have been working together to automate the process of Microsoft procuring and managing the software licenses for the Xbox video game network. Now, Microsoft has over 3,000 business partners for what is basically the world's largest video game platform. And putting together their unique contract rules, their monthly statements is time consuming. When we start to move them to a smart contract on a blockchain, the results are really amazing. Literally 99% cycle time reduction, from 45 days of cycle time to generate monthly statements to nearly real-time information 4 to 5 minutes after transactions are completed at Microsoft. They can be in the ERP system of a business partner recording revenue. Cost that, including migrating all the legacy contracts, will probably be about half what it was previously, and a much higher level of trust because each business partner can see as it's happening the business transactions and the rules of their contract as it's being applied. So the business case just for process automation with smart contracts is enormous, right? And sure enough, what we see is that even though blockchain is complicated, it feels like kind of new technology, it's really starting to get really good traction within the enterprise, and not just driven by, hey, I want to have a blockchain and it's cool, but I have a specific useful return on investment. And we see this across a bunch of industries. First and foremost, supply chains. Blockchains, it turns out, are fantastic for managing multi-party supply chains, whether they're food and beverage or medical supply chains. Shipping and logistics industry is on board, but also fund management and financial services and payments is really accelerating, driven in part by the interest in Bitcoin and the launch of the digital currency electronic payment program in China, but also because blockchains are very useful in the sense that we can have not only a business agreement, but we can include payment as a part of that process. Now, from an EY strategy perspective, in terms of where we think biggest return on investment will come relatively soon, we've prioritized 3 areas for investment beyond financial statement audit, which is one of our biggest businesses. In terms of business process, top of the issue is financial services. So we see big value proposition in financial services. The creation of programmable digital assets is going to be tremendously powerful, right? The ability to test and manage smart business contracts is we think, something that's going to be very powerful. And not just in cryptocurrencies, but the big future trend, the thing that's really taking hold in blockchain, is the use of this technology with real traditional fiat currencies like dollars, euros, yen, renminbi, and so on. Secondly, physical and digital supply chains. If it's a physical or digital asset, you need to buy it, manage it, transfer it, trade it. Blockchains are an ideal environment for that, right? And then finally, public service administration. The transparency, the tamper-proof nature of blockchains, right? The ability to have public records has proven to be incredibly powerful. And we're seeing multinational agencies like the World Bank, the IMF, and multiple governments adopt blockchain technology because of their ability to see both where the funding is going and also the value that's being created by government spending or aid grants. So let me just dig into a couple of areas to dive a little bit deeper into what the value proposition is for investing in blockchain technology. One of my favorites is around the area of supply chain integration. So if you think about a typical manufacturing supply chain, you've got raw materials, manufacturing, transportation, warehousing, sales, and then support, right? As you buy products, they are moving through this process. They are getting assembled into products. Products are being transported, warehoused, sold, and supported. And every single component, starting at the raw materials level and then into the manufacturing and so on, they can be represented as digital tokens. So if you buy a product and you would like to know, like, where did that particular screen, or where did the chip, or where did the CPU in my tablet computer come from, your manufacturer will be able to tell you. And if there's a set of defects, they'll be able to trace those defects across a network, right? That's one of the big appeals. Like, we're doing vaccine traceability for a major company in China. And the value proposition there is that in the event that the vaccine doesn't perform as it should, right, or a supplier tells you that there was a problem with a raw material, it's possible to trace both forwards and backwards along this process. Not only can we have traceability through the use of digital tokens, but the smart contract component allows us to automate business processes at one step at a time. So whether it's converting a purchase order into working capital, or automating the replenishment at an inventory system, smart contracts aren't just legally binding agreements, they contain business logic. So for example, with a big automaker, we set up a system that when replenishment is required, the Kanban system triggers a smart contract, which requests both that the part be made available and the shipping company go and collect it, right? So the level of process automation and record keeping across multiple enterprises becomes continuously digital, right? One of the other things that's really challenging in modern enterprises is that very few companies actually do all of their own industrial activity, right? They depend on networks of contractors and subcontractors and their own subsidiaries. But it's actually very hard to do something like a global procurement agreement if you don't know how much your authorized business partner may have spent. On a blockchain, using a smart contract, we can keep track of things like total volume purchased, aggregated spend. We can make sure then that every purchase order gets exactly the correct pricing, and we can make sure that authorized buyers are always correctly represented. So let's talk about where things are going. So there's obviously a huge amount of value proposition that can be created, but it's not just going to compress cycle times. It's also, I believe, going to blur the line over time between finance and operations using this combination of digital tokens and smart contracts. Now, early on, digital tokens weren't actually that smart, right? They tended to keep track of things like who owned that asset, what its history was, and perhaps if you have a serial number with that asset. But in the recent years, things have really started to mature, and we have seen the creation of what's being called in the consumer space DeFi, or decentralized finance. And what that is it's sets of smart contracts that allow you to hand over an asset, right? And that smart contract can manage that asset and do things like allow others to lease it out, or pay you interest for borrowing that asset, or provide you with insurance for that asset. So we're now able to actually start doing mature digital automated services, right? Starting in financial services. This is still very early stage. It still lacks a lot of the features that enterprises are going to need. It lacks privacy. We've seen quite a few bugs. But as this matures and hardens and becomes privacy enabled, the value proposition of being able to have programmable assets, programmable financial services, is going to mean that this idea that I have an operations area and a finance area is going to start to blur together, as it's possible to kind of manage both at once, right? And so I think as these things start to come together, years from now, we are going to look back on 2020 as kind of a pivotal year in the world of blockchain, with a number of really important milestones. And if you haven't been following some of this stuff, it's really useful to take note of this, right? I think by far the most important one is the launch of the digital currency electronic payment program in China. Now, DCEP, as it's known, isn't actually a blockchain, but it is the world's first properly digital, fully tokenized currency. And it's going to have a profound impact because the People's Bank of China has a vision that's not just about digital payments, because we already have a lot of digital payments. They see a future where DCEP is at the heart of smart digital contracts, payment systems, credit and finance inside of China and across Asia, right? So if you do business in Asia Pacific, especially if you do business in China, the future is going to look like very heavily focused on digital payments, digital currencies, and blockchain-based contracts. That's driven by the central government. Secondly, if you've been following it, a number of big companies have started to allocate meaningful percentages of their corporate treasury assets into digital assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum. Now, is it a huge amount of money? No. Is it a significant milestone as an asset allocation standpoint? Absolutely, right? So this year really marks the shift from blockchain and Bitcoin are interesting to Bitcoin is the kind of asset that a Fortune 500 company will put some of their treasury into. Thirdly, the European community has implemented a crypto framework for digital assets. This is a regulatory framework that's going to speed up the process of helping companies launch, sell, distribute, and manage digital assets that have financial value and implication. And then finally, we are seeing really with the things like the baseline protocol and the explosion of users and transaction volumes in the Ethereum network, what I would call the true industrialization of public blockchains. Right, they have really scaled up and performed incredibly well, and they are on the brink of a major set of new functional capabilities that will be deployed next year that will significantly increase the amount of transaction processing power, the volume of transactions, and the security of those transactions. Right. Now, how long will all of this take? My expectation, my own forecast, is that in 2030, 50% of all new business-to-business contracts will be done on a public blockchain. How do I come up with this forecast? The answer is by looking backwards at the adoption of public cloud. So if you go back to 2006, this is the year that Amazon launched web services and their public storage API. At the time, it was a breakthrough in terms of usability, but it still encountered huge amounts of skepticism, right? A lot of large corporations were skeptical. At best, they would just sort of dip their toe in the water. Fast forward about 11 years, and the majority of new enterprise applications in 2017, new applications, were deployed on the public cloud. So in the space of about a decade, we went from, I'm just going to dip my toe in the water, to on average, more than half of new solutions will be deployed. I think we'll see a similar pattern with blockchain. This is the year 2020 when it's possible to really do this in a meaningful way. And by 2030, a decade from now, it will be approaching the point of becoming the default choice for the way enterprises transact with each other. So that's been a whirlwind tour of kind of our vision of blockchain, the value proposition, and the business case for implementing public blockchains and making use of them in your enterprise. And with that, I would like to hand it back to Johnny, our moderator.
Thanks so much for that, Paul. I hope everyone at home has sort of found that a very useful overview as to the sort of current issues and looking at the public blockchain sphere, and a really good base level understanding now that we should all have as we move into the panel section. So I'd like to invite the other panelists to turn their cameras back on and unmute themselves, please. Good to see all of your faces again. And so I want to initially pick up on some of the themes that were raised during Paul's presentation there. And Mary, if I can turn to you first. So you obviously have a lot of experience of working with companies who are looking to adopt blockchain-enabled business solutions. What are some of the common misconceptions and objections that you face when you're discussing public blockchain use with senior executives?
Okay. Oh, thanks, Johnny. Well, as an academic, I think to answer the question, I just want to tell you where we get our data from. So we're really studying at the University of Arkansas the first generation of enterprise solutions that are already in production today. And that's because we don't want to study aspirational things. What does it really take to make this work? And the reality is most of the applications that are in production today, the project started 2016, 2017. So at that time, when they were looking at public or private blockchains, they were concerned, well, public blockchains were mature. Ethereum had just been launched in 2015. They were worried about scalability. They were worried about high electricity costs. But really the message is, if you're starting again today, you've got to look closely at public blockchains, because a lot of the concerns that were there 2 or 3 years ago, we've made a tremendous amount of progress. And so one of the reasons why I'm excited for the audience to be exposed to this topic today is now we're starting to see first generation solutions that are on public blockchains, and they are getting a lot of business value.
Fantastic, Mary. Thank you for offering the academic perspective on that and a little bit more insight into some of the movement that you're seeing in the market towards the sort of public blockchain sphere. And Paul, something that I wanted to bring back up with yourself and you touched on in the presentation was looking at security, and that's obviously a massive concern for any business when they adopt any kind of new technology or solution. And so I wanted to find out a little bit more about the ability to guarantee security when you are bringing together such large ecosystems on a public blockchain.
So security in all of these environments is driven by some level of maturity. There was a saying we had when I was at IBM, which was, when you ship code, you ship bugs, right? So by definition, at the enterprise level, you want to be, consumers are at the cutting edge of DeFi, right? If you're an enterprise, you want to hang back a little bit, right? And then you want to deploy good tools, right? There are, we make one, there's others out there that allow you to test the code that you're about to enter into. So there are absolutely good established practices that companies can make use of. There's no guarantee, whether it's on blockchain or any other digital system, that you're free from security risk. But we certainly think very strategically about it. One of the most important design criteria that we had in building out with our colleagues at Consensus and Microsoft and others, in building out the baseline protocol, was that no enterprise data should ever actually go on the blockchain. So we use the blockchain as a kind of very sophisticated middleware between companies. We put on the blockchain proofs, links, mathematical verifications of transaction activity, but we never put enterprise data on chain, because that way, if you're hacked, if you're attacked, you just cut the link to that data and it still remains private. So we're very, very conscious that in fact, that we live in an imperfect world when it comes to security, and we need to plan for the possibility of attack.
Yeah, I can.
Fantastic. Go on, York.
Yeah, I was going to say we live in an imperfect world when it comes to identity and the internet as well, right? So, this is, to your point, any digital technology, any software has bugs, and bugs are worked out over time. In fact, coming from the software development industry, if you don't have a certain number of bugs in your code, it means you're not actually finding them during the development process. So you look at, this telemetry and statistics associated with what does something look like, or what is it supposed to look like when it ships. As Paul mentioned, the public blockchains are on the cutting edge of both security, distributed systems, and movement of value among a domain that is a global domain. And that's an important metric when you look at why this is such an important technology. The domain of the internet is a global domain, right? If you want to transact with anyone on the internet, you want to do it in a global domain, right? And so this is one of the sort of the quandaries of where we've been on this journey of consortia blockchains, right? What I've always said myself is that, on this journey, we are actually have to educate institutions. We have to educate CISOs. We have to educate the development community. And that didn't happen on the internet, right, on the public internet, right? It happened on the intranet, right? People learned the technology stacks in a safe domain of their own company. And so consortium and private blockchains actually are the vehicle to do that, right, in the short term. When we set out on this journey with Paul at EY and Consensus, we, on the baseline protocol, the key sort of driver and mission was to discover what would have to be true if enterprises were to be able to transact over this thing called public blockchain. And so that is what the design principles were around actually creating baseline. And it's been a fantastic collaboration that, yes, there are some very advanced technologies in play there, like zero knowledge proofs, advanced from the perspective of enterprise, right? There's actually a tremendous amount of research and implementations of zero knowledge proof in the public domain. And so we're leveraging a lot of the public domain technologies to actually secure this in a way that makes sense for enterprises.
Thanks so much. So it's interesting to hear. I mean, I think whenever we're discussing new and innovative technologies or what are perceived to be kind of risky areas, it's weighing up the potential benefit to a business versus any kind of additional risks that they can maybe see when using it. But it sounds though we're very much in the kind of advanced state of moving into the sort of positive domain there. Something else that I know will always be a primary concern of any business when they're looking to assess the use or adoption of new or nascent technologies will be the perceived success measurements, and also looking at how to demonstrate ROI to justify those decisions to any budget holders. So if I perhaps go back to you, York, to expand on that in a bit more detail as to how would you go about demonstrating success when using public blockchains, and what are the potential ROI benefits that people can often see?
I think, with any new technology project, you actually have to spend a significant amount of time looking at the value drivers for the business. And if you can spend time looking at the value drivers for the business, that gives you the ROI metrics associated with why you're actually going and doing this. In the case of an internal project that I'm running, we actually revisited this 3 times so far in the project. We did a top-down approach. We did a bottoms-up approach. We presented, the results. We got some skepticism from some folks in the organization, so we went back and did another deep dive. And we've gotten to a point where on this particular project, we're seeing a $25 million per year cost savings. And so it just takes work, right? Like a value work stream is just work, right? Go do the work. Because that will give you the reason why you're allowed to do it. And if you think about, a $25+ million benefit on a yearly basis, it also gives you the funding model, right? This allows you to fund the work. So it's not something that should be ignored. I think what often happens, particularly in new technology spheres, is technologists get very excited about the technology. They go off and do projects. They don't do any business analysis or ROI about why that should be done, particularly in the context of things like innovation groups and centers of excellence. So you have to be really careful and deliberate about why you're doing things, even when they're in an innovation pod. Just understanding, why am I running this proof of technology, proof of value, proof of concept, right? It has an outcome at every step of the stage.
Thanks so much, Paul. I think it's really nice for us to get an opportunity to address, as we have done in the last sort of 5 minutes or so, some of the common misconceptions around maybe the use of public blockchains, talking a bit more about the security, and then looking at sort of addressing success metrics and ROI. Paul or Mary, any points you wanted to pick up on there before we talk to Stefano a little bit more about Answer Check?
No, I'm good. I am excited to talk about Answer Check, so I want to hear Stefano's story.
Fantastic. So Stefano, just to bring you into the fold then. So ANSA have really proven themselves to be trailblazers in the use of public blockchains. And I was hoping you'd be able to sort of tell the audience a little bit more about the fantastic work that you've been doing with ANSA Check and you know, just some more information around the project in general.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me first start from ANSA, because to understand ANSA Check, you have to understand what ANSA does and which is our main problem nowadays. We are a news agency. News agency produce news. Every day we deliver something between 2,500 and 300 and 3,500 news per day. That is our job, you know, since 1 century. What is happening in the last 25 years is that once upon a time we were the only primary source of reliable information. So you can imagine the media business as a reverse pyramid, and you had news agency at the bottom, and then above all the platforms that were using our news. Since the web came and the social media in the last 10 years, the pyramid has changed. You know, now it's a normal pyramid in which you have a lot of source of information. And the role of the news agencies is severely challenged by this. So when I stepped into ANSA 2 years ago, after a long time in the media business, I was thinking about our future. I was thinking about our assets. And in this world in which we were not anymore the primary source of information for the rest of the media, but we have to compete with, you know, news that are commodities on the web or social media that are doing exactly the job that once upon a time the news agency were doing. I was thinking about what is our main asset. Our main asset is reputation, is the fact that we still are reliable in what we produce and what we provide to the media business and to the public. And while I was thinking about that, about the fact that this is the real asset on which we have to leverage for our future, I received a phone call from a smart guy from EY, a company in which I was working before joining ANSA. We were working together in EY on the use of blockchain on different products. Some of has been mentioned by Paul in his presentation. I refer specifically to the fact that with this smart guy, his name is Giuseppe Perrone, I think is on the audience. We were talking about the application of blockchain on traceability of expensive wines or you know, sophisticated product, and how blockchain can be used to avoid you know, fake copies of expensive goods. He called me and he said, what do you think if we apply the same system to the production of news in ANSA? Does it make sense? And I said to Giuseppe, yes, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense because it's a tool. I don't understand how it works, and I will never understand how it works. But the result is a tool that can help us to defend our brand, our assets, our reputation. But I told him, you have to find a way to meet our technical expectations that are quite high, and I will put you in the cage of lions with journalists, and you have to tame them and tell them that we need something technologically that will you know, certify what they are doing, because this is exactly how blockchain works. He is a smart guy, so he was, fighting in the cage of lion, finding a technical solution. But then something happened in the world. We were in February, March this year. As you know, Italy has been the forefront after China in the COVID emergency. Nobody knows here or elsewhere how to deal with this. What we have realized is that we have a website in which we publish part of the news that we sell in our newswire. So we have a B2B and a B2C model at the same time. Our website literally exploded during the first 2 months of the pandemic. And this, this is what was not a good sign at all, but it was a very good sign for us, because that means that during emergency, people goes back to reliability and to, news that are reliable when really they are challenged on their health, on their, surviving. So during that period in which we were studying with EY how to use blockchain to certify our news, something happened that a lot of fake news started to circulate, and to make them reliable, they were using exactly our layout. So they were publishing news on the web, but not only on the web, using our trademark sign to say this makes a fake news reliable, because it was ANSA saying that, it was not anyone else. So in that period, we have decided to protect our business, and we have introduced the ANSA check, the results of the project with the EY. ANSA check is a tag in every news that we publish, and if you click on this tag, we will certify ourselves. We will say this news comes from ANSA. We have published this news exactly in this moment, and so we are saying we are the source. And that worked, because now when they are taking our layout, they are taking also ANSA check with that. But if you click on ANSA check on a fake news, a pop-up will say this is not ANSA, this is a fake news, and was an extraordinary result, because we are not making business out of it. We are not making money. We are not using blockchain to reduce our cost or to improve our revenues. We just are using the blockchain just to protect our main asset. And in the fight of the main enemy, I think, for everybody, that are fake news. So it's the first time in my life, I would say my long life, because I had the privilege to be disclosed as my age in your presentation. I'm the only one in the panel in which you say how old I am, and I am. It's the first time in my life that I've been invited to so many webinars and conferences, and I had the privilege to be studied by the University of Arkansas as a case study. So it means that we probably did something right. And the second message is, I hope, normally you do this, to get a competitive advantage. We didn't do that for a competitive advantage. We did that because we thought it was right to defend the truth. And so we hope that we will lose soon this competitive advantage, and that a lot of competitors or other media platform, we use the same technology to certify what they are doing, because we are certifying ourselves also when we do mistakes, and we make mistakes every day. Every day we do it. Before, we were not in the position, we could easily cheat and say, it was not ANSA, we didn't do that because, the news will immediately disappear from our newswire. Now, with blockchain, it will remain forever, even the mistakes that we are doing. So we hope that everybody in the media business will soon adopt this technology, because that will improve all, the media landscape.
Fantastic, Stefano. I think it's incredibly exciting for all of us and everyone probably watching at home to hear about blockchain in the real world, in terms of the impact that it's having right now on the mitigation of fake news, and such a fantastic use of its potential, and something that really, really excites the community. And I'm sure there'll be many more invitations after this one to come and speak about it in detail. And thank you for taking us through it there. You mentioned actually that Mary at the University of Arkansas has been looking into this project. And Mary, I wanted to bring you in here and find out a little bit more from you as to what really excites you about AnswerCheck.
Okay. Well, first of all, Stefano, I don't want to leave you hanging. I'm 57 years old and I'm fabulous. So.
Me too. I'm 61. So.
Okay. And anyone out there, if you want access to this 20-page academic case study on AnswerCheck, just go to blockchain.uark.edu and go to our research page, and you'll have availability. So I'm going to focus on 4 things that are exciting about AnswerCheck. Okay, the first thing is it's a great visible use case of a public blockchain by a traditional enterprise. So we know from years and years of academic research that only a very small percentage of industries are going to jump first, or enterprises want to jump first. Everyone kind of wants to hold back and say, somebody else jump first and let's see if they get business value out of it. And so I think this AnswerCheck is a great example of an early adopter getting business value, and it'll have very powerful mimetic influences on other enterprises. Second lesson is they made me ask a different question. Many times you'll hear people say, how do you put together a minimal viable ecosystem? And we tend to focus on the number. We say, okay, well, too many ecosystem partners, then it's slow to deploy. If you don't have enough, nobody else wants to adopt. But I think a better question is to ask, what is the characteristic of the minimal viable ecosystem? And to me, you can do it with 1 or 2, as long as you are starting with an enterprise that has a great reputation, and ANSA does. They're the #1 trusted news source, and they have network centrality. And ANSA has that. They're part of a big network of 38 or 36 other publishers. So when they adopt, the other publishers will come along. So I think they made me think differently about how to put together a minimal viable ecosystem. The other thing is, what do you do with a minimal viable product? The other nice thing about this solution, the world will understand it immediately. It prevents imposters, it authenticates a story, you know where the news source is, and from there they can build a lot of additional functionality. And then the final part is really about thinking through the value proposition for all of the stakeholders. So it wasn't just value to ANSA, it's also value to the readers. It's value to their ecosystem partners. So to me, this case is such a beautiful, understandable, visible deployment on a public blockchain delivering business value today.
Wonderful. And I would definitely encourage people to go away and read the case study and delve into it a little bit more detail, because I found it to be an incredibly compelling business case and super interesting as well, and something that's incredibly relevant to all of our daily lives right now, unfortunately. And so it's great to see something fighting back on that. I'm conscious that we are running up to about 7 minutes left of this discussion now. So I want to move on to another case study, in fact. And I'm going to pick up something that Paul, you began to explain in detail on your presentation with regards to the Xbox royalties project. But York, if I can direct this at yourself, can you tell people at home a little bit more about the issue that you were trying to resolve here, and some of the benefits for both publishers and Microsoft in the solution that you came up with?
Yeah, so let me start from the fact that this was actually driven by a finance organization. So this is a financial settlement issue. But more generally, it's actually important to understand that this is a digital supply chain, right? The supply chain involves the platform, Microsoft as a arbiter of that platform, being Xbox, and then game publishers, right? And then in addition to that, it's a B2C model, right? So you have consumers actually using the games on the platform. And the parties involved obviously are the game publishers and all of the long value chain associated with the game publishers that come to market. It's very similar to the music industry. There's a lot of royalties that flow through the music industry for a single song, similar to a game. So the challenge here that we're looking at is how do we provide how do we get business benefits out of actually providing the efficiency from a finance processing perspective, from a Microsoft perspective? And then secondly, how do we actually provide near real-time data about what's happening on the Xbox platform for publishers? And you can imagine as a publisher who's driving campaigns, digital campaigns to get users to use their product, they'd want to know in real time or near real time, actually, are those users converting, right? Are they actually using the product? And so having near real-time visibility, at least from my perspective, coming out of the digital marketing space is absolutely critical, right? If I'm a publisher of a game. So from the Microsoft perspective, we collaborated with Ernst & Young on this project, and we looked at what were the processing problems that we had from a settlement perspective, and how do we actually make that more efficient? And Paul mentioned a couple of the examples, but just to reflect on those, there are about 3,000 business partners on the Xbox platform, right? So it's an incredibly large market. And then there are competitors to the platform in the market like Sony and Nintendo. And many others. And we've actually been in discussions to bring other competitors into this market because the bigger that it is, actually the more valuable it is to the publishers, right? And so this is actually an answer to one of the questions about having competitors in the market. It's actually incredibly important for a ecosystem design, to Mary's point. We're able to take settlement cycle time from 45 days to minutes, right? And if you look at cycle time as a key metric in a physical or digital supply chain, that is what everybody's focused on. How do I reduce my effort? How do I get faster to the end result that I'm trying to get to, whether it's physical or digital goods, like in the case of Xbox. We're also able to, in our value calculations, to look at, how are we able to reduce costs. A big, huge issue across literally every sector is something called reconciliation. And reconciliation is a problem that exists in banking, in physical supply chains, and digital supply chains, and many other contractual relationships the world over. Reconciliation means that you're looking at your data and I'm looking at my data, and we disagree about the data. Right. And therefore, we have to figure out how to reconcile that problem. And often it winds up that the reconciliation is splitting the check essentially and saying, well, we can't figure this out. It takes too much work. Let's just resolve it by agreeing to, split the difference. That's not a way to do business, right? And so one of the key value properties that is driven by blockchains is that, as Paul said earlier, we are looking at a distributed shared data structure. And that shared data structure is also hardened, right? And so a hardened shared data structure means that when Paul looks at the data and Microsoft looks at the data and Ubisoft looks at the data, we all know with 100% certainty that we're looking at the same data. And so we now up-level the conversation away from disagreements about the data, and therefore we can level ourselves out of the reconciliation mess that we've been in for many decades.
Thanks so much for that, Joachim. Great to delve into that into a little bit more detail. I can see from everyone at home that there's been many questions coming in throughout today's webinar. And as I mentioned at the top, unfortunately, we're not going to have time to take those today, but I really would encourage everyone who wants to pick up on any of the themes that we've discussed today with any of our panelists to reach out to them. And I'm sure they'd be more than happy to help answer any questions that you have or delve into things in a little bit more detail. I can see we're go on, Paul.
If you want to send me the questions afterwards, I will put together a document with answers, and I'll publish it on my Twitter feed, which is @pbrody, PBRODY, and I'll also put my presentation up on the Twitter feed as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Paul. So if everyone gets their questions in, I will make sure they find their way to Paul, and then we will get the answers for those up for you. I'm conscious we're coming into the final minutes of our panel today. So I just wanted to quickly go around our panelists and ask them for a final thought that they'd like to leave our attendees with today. Mary, if I could turn to you first for that, and then we'll get around all the other panelists before we finish for today. Sorry, Mary, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, Johnny. Yeah.
No worries.
Okay. Well, every enterprise has one of three strategies. You can either lead, you can be a fast follower, or you can be a laggard. And to me, the biggest risk is if you're going to be a laggard. So the time to start learning and acting is now.
Fantastic. Paul?
Every company has to think about the fact that today there's no company that's entirely by themselves. Everybody is part of a network. And so when you are part of a network, thinking about how to interact with your fellow network participants is extremely important. Public blockchains are really the only way to do this in a guaranteed level playing field. And I think that is, if you take away only one thing from my perspective, it's that this is a mechanism by which you can have fair, consistent, truly digital interactions with the companies that you must work with.
Fantastic. York?
Yeah, just a couple of data points. One is think about what you can do with digital uniqueness. Do ideation sessions around this, and think about the domain of your business partner relationships and combine those two together and think about how you can actually transform the way you've done things for the past 20 plus years. Fundamentally, this technology allows us to move beyond the siloed technology approaches that we've been implementing. And that is one of the things, those two tools, digital uniqueness in a global domain or in a large domain, are ways to start to think about how does this actually allow me to transform the way I think about the way I'm building siloed systems or systems that provide value to me versus systems that provide value to my partner network.
Thank you, York. And Stefano, very briefly, if I could ask for a final thought from yourself.
Yeah, I go back to what Mary says about two things. The first one is it's true, our shareholders that are a newspaper publisher are introducing the same answer check with their name in their website, and I'm so proud of it, and that will probably spread around. And the second thing, answer check is only a starting point. There are huge opportunity behind that, and we will see. I hope to be back in a webinar in 1 year to discuss what is happening this year on the adoption of this technology.
Thank you, Stefano. And thank you so much to all of our panelists today for joining. I'm sure you agree with me that it's been a fantastic ride through the world of public blockchain, and obviously lots of ground that we were unable to cover today, and we'll pick up with everyone afterwards. But just a massive thank you to everyone for joining at home. And I look forward to connecting with you all again soon for our next series of Reuters Events webinars, and enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you very much.
Johnny.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.